Hello and welcome back. I sure hope you're all enjoying your summer. This has been my first summer I've ever spent in Utah. As you may know, I used to live and work in California in the summer months, helping my mom run the swim school. So now that we are retired, I stayed here this summer and it's been amazing. I taught a few swim lessons in the morning each day and have just been trying to be the best wife I possibly can. Honestly, I still wake up every day in shock that I'm really married. When you have been single for so long, it's just hard to believe. The other day, I was having a conversation with some friends, and we were talking about what a blessing it is to know the bitter so that we can truly appreciate the sweet. And while I never thought my life is bitter while I was single, because honestly, I had an amazing life and nothing to complain about, still, I never knew it could be so sweet. Daryl is a gem all day, every day. You would not believe someone could be such a gentleman who always puts others first. He is amazing. As I was telling my friends, on rare occasion, Daryl may forget to put the toilet seat down, and then he feels so bad about it. And I say, Daryl, I waited 30 years for you. You can leave the toilet seat up all day, every day. It's okay. Now, I know if I had married him at 19, I might be a little bugged with that by now, but not when you have waited so long to find the man of your dreams. Again, when we have tasted the bitter, we can appreciate the sweet. And I appreciate so much about this great man, and I hope I don't ever get petty with the things that don't really matter. Okay, so on with today's podcast. All right, so my mom and I have this little joke that goes back and forth between us. You see, after my father passed, she got really lonely. People would consistently come over to the house and ask her how she's doing. Well, the first time this happened, I happened to be there when they asked her, and she said, I am so lonely without my husband. I looked at her and said, Mom, I have been without a husband my whole life. You might want to say that in front of someone who has a husband. You need to know your audience. Well, we both laughed, and after that it became a joke. If someone came over and I was there and they asked her how she was doing, she would look over at me and then back at them and say, well, I can't tell you right now. I need to know my audience. And then we would all laugh. Well, this podcast is about communicating with those who live in Holland or the unexpected life. I remember years ago reading an article about communication etiquette. And one of the things it mentioned, among many things about appropriate communication, was to, quote, cram for the exam. And think about who you'll be talking to and be sensitive to their situation. For example, if they are divorced, or out of work, or don't have children but want kids, or have health issues, or things like that. Just be mindful of their situation, be sensitive to it, and then speak appropriately. Basically, know your audience. As someone who lives in Holland, and basically always has, I know all too well the importance of this advice. And those of you who also live in Holland will totally get it. Being single for forever, I remember hearing some of the most thoughtless comments. A speaker who was addressing a group of singles from the age of 30 to 45 said, I want you to know, I know what it's like to be single. I didn't get married until I was 26. She obviously didn't know her audience. To a 40-year-old, 26 is still a baby. There's just no comparison. Another woman whose husband was away on business for a few weeks, said, now I know what it's like to be single. My husband's been gone for 2 weeks. It was all I could do to not share with her how ridiculous that comment was. As she had a husband, she was able to communicate with him regularly and had a date of his return. Anyway, obviously there was no comparison to really being single. I remember overhearing someone who had a big, beautiful home and a lot of expensive toys complaining about how they were so poor and didn't have any money to go on a family trip to someone who lived in an apartment. You can imagine what the person in the apartment was thinking. They would have loved to have had that problem. The amount of money and the use of it is so relative, and I can empathize with being financially strapped. But they obviously didn't consider their audience when they shared their financial woes. I remember a friend of mine complaining because she and her husband always wanted 3 kids, and she couldn't get pregnant with number 3. She literally came to me in tears, and I just remember thinking, "You're kidding. You have a husband. I would be thrilled with just a husband, and then you have 2 kids. Lucky you." Well, she probably would have gotten more empathy from someone who had a husband and 3 or more kids than from me who didn't have any of that. It's almost like complaining to someone who is paralyzed that you stepped your toe and it really hurts. You just don't do it. It's so important to know your audience. Far too many people have had to endure thoughtless comments, not just singles, but divorced, couples who don't have kids, couples who have kids who've lost their way, those who have lost children to accidents or sickness. In fact, one lady I met had a child who passed away, and 2 months later, someone told her it was time to get over it and move on. Oh, it can be so painful at times. It's a crazy thought, but people who have not gone through what you are going through often feel like an authority for your life. For example, I remember someone who was married and not even happily married, but felt that because they were married and I wasn't, that they were an authority on getting married. And so they made ruthless comments to me on why I wasn't married and what I needed to do to get married. It was the most bizarre thing because they had made it clear that they had a very dysfunctional marriage. But they felt like just the act of marriage, regardless how bad it was for them, made them a person of authority and gave them a right to say what they wanted, and I had to listen as if they were the teacher and I was their student, because after all, I wasn't married and they were. In Holland, or the unexpected life, we get a lot of this. I am sure you have a lot better stories than I do. And if we are all being honest, we have certainly been guilty of it ourselves. I don't know of anyone that is exempt from saying thoughtless things. I am certainly guilty. Even if we do have good intentions, we've all been guilty of this. I remember a lady by the name of Cheiko Okasaki who gave this great analogy as she was speaking to a large group of singles. She was also single as she was widowed at the time. And she talked about, imagine if someone were to come up to you and were to say, "You are so amazing, even with those ears." Or, "I can't believe how successful you are, even with those ears." Or, "You are so good with children, even with those ears." Or, "You are such a good friend, even with those ears." Well, by the time they're done, you're sitting there thinking, what's wrong with my ears? Even though they paid these wonderful compliments, the focus became the ears. And she gave this analogy about how singles often feel that way. People will say great things to us, but they keep pointing out how we're single. And then pretty soon you're like, well, what's wrong that I'm single? Well, after I heard this analogy, I remember telling my mom, and I go, "Mom, this is how it feels to be single." Because people would say nice things to me all the time. "Oh, Becky, you are so good with kids, even though you're single." Or "You're such a great friend, even though you're single." I've heard those comments. And so I shared that with my mom and said, "Mom, just so you know, this is the way singles feel. We don't need additional attention because we're single." Well, that next week, a lady at church was sharing a biography that she had read that was amazing. And she held up the biography and she was going on and on about it and was saying what a great book it was. And then at the end, she added, "And you're not going to believe this, the lady who wrote it is single." Well, my mom and I just smiled, and like I told her, I never felt out of place or different or anything until someone mentioned that I was single. Yet I know that their intentions are good. So it's a tricky situation, but something that we can all do better at. Instead of trying to teach someone a lesson from their circumstances or being judgmental or labeling them, how much nicer it would be if we provided people with a soft landing. Probably most of us have been on a plane when it had a bumpy or rough landing. It really can be nerve-wracking. We hold on tight, we might even say a prayer, we clench our teeth until the plane levels out, It can be pretty intense. Sometimes we provide people with the same bumpy landing by the things that we say, by jumping to conclusions, being judgmental, insisting we are right, or being a conversation stopper. Have you ever met a conversation stopper? This is someone who does or says something that puts a stop to the conversation by either telling you what you did wrong, or topping your story with a better one, or being condescending or a know-it-all, or jumping in and monopolizing the conversation, or ignoring you altogether. After a few times with this person, we usually shut down and stop sharing. It's just too painful, so it's easier to say nothing at all. Therefore, the conversation has stopped. We have all been in situations where we have been hurt, troubled, confused, or curious, and we share these feelings with someone. When we share them with someone who's judgmental, cynical, defensive, or all-knowing, then our conversation has a bumpy landing. It doesn't feel good. We don't want to land there any more than we have to. So eventually we clam up and start flying or conversing elsewhere, which is really unfortunate if you are of the belief that the most important thing we can do is to love one another. But some push us away, or we push others away without even knowing it, by giving them a rough landing. Instead, we have the option of providing a soft landing. Over the years, I've come to appreciate the soft landings in my life. Those people whom I can go to and share my deepest feelings with and feel totally safe. I know that they're listening, not judging me, not waiting for me to pause so that they can set me straight or take over the conversation. Being single, I am sure that there were those who had all the answers as to why I wasn't married. Maybe even my friends did. But if they did, they kept it to themselves. So I felt safe with them. I felt like they believed in me, and that is the best feeling in the world. They always provided me with a soft landing. This enabled them to love me, and me love them more freely. It was awesome. In fact, even though I was into my 50s before I got married, I never felt void of love. Sure, I didn't have the love of my life, but I had so much love, and I'm convinced that this is why. I was surrounded by people who gave me soft landings, who loved me, who didn't label me, who didn't judge me, who weren't critical of me. This allowed them to love me freely and me to love them freely. We can get through anything when we have this kind of love in our lives, and that is one reason that Holland has been such a good and positive experience for me. Sure, there are tricky situations that we need to navigate through, but we can do it with this kind of love. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a neighbor of mine about 15 years ago. As you may know, I am LDS, and it's a huge part of my life. My neighbor was not LDS. Of course, that didn't matter to me. We hit it off. We were blessings in each other's lives, and I loved this friendship, and so did she. However, she had a concern. So one day we went to Mimi's Cafe to get a cup of hot chocolate to talk. And I remember she said to me, "Becky, I'm really enjoying this friendship, but I need you to promise me that 2 years from now, if I have not joined your church, that you will still want to be friends." And I said to her, "Oh my goodness, I can guarantee you that. But I need you to promise me that every time my church comes up in a conversation, because it's bound to, because it's so much of what I do, but I said, you promise me that every time it comes up that you don't think I'm trying to convert you." She said, "It's a deal." And so from then on, we could just love freely. We didn't have to she didn't have to worry about me judging her or having an ulterior motive. And I didn't have to watch everything I said. We both knew we had a soft landing with each other. We felt safe and loved. And we are dear friends to this day. Even in the most difficult situations, we can navigate through it when we know our audience, show respect, and communicate appropriately. This allows love to flow both ways. Well, I hope this helps us all to reevaluate our conversations and ask ourselves if we are sensitive to our audience, and if we are a conversation stopper, and if we're providing a soft landing for others. If so, I know that we will enjoy more love than we ever thought possible, even in this beautiful place that we call Holland. And that's a beautiful thing. Well, I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.